I look at large language models and I see huge associated environmental impact, limited case studies in terms of good outcomes from an environmental perspective. And then I look at these much smaller, much more targeted machine learning applications that have much smaller environmental impacts in terms of their resource requirements, but potentially much larger positive impacts in terms of energy efficiency, nature monitoring, time savings around compliance.
AI will save the world, won't it? Solving climate change, protecting biodiversity, finding new vaccines. We hear a lot about its promises in the news, a narrative carefully crafted by big tech companies. On the other end, Green.io regular listeners know how impactful the massive adoption of AI can be for water resources, carbon emission, or energy consumptions. Being aware of the toll, can we still find AI for good use cases once we look beyond the hype? I've asked Jeremy Tamanini to join the Green.io show to discuss real use cases. Jeremy is based in New York and is a seasoned sustainability consultant who hosts the Applied AI for Sustainability meetups. He also contributes to the IEEE standard to define a measurement framework for reporting on environmental indicators for artificial intelligence systems. If anyone can lead us to concrete feedback, that will be him. So without further ado, here's my discussion with Jeremy. Welcome on Green.io, Jeremy. Thanks a lot for being there.
A pleasure to be here.
You invited me. Yeah, same-wise. You invited me several times to your meeting, so now I'm very happy to have you hosted on the Green.io podcast. I wanted you to join the show because, as you might have spotted, earlier this year, we started with the Green.io podcast to cover a bit more the tech for good angle. And I will put this under bracket, between brackets, sorry. And that's for a very good reason, which is not having the narrative on what tech can bring of positive to society, to only techno-solutionist people with a very over-optimistic approach of tech. Tech is God. Tech will solve everything. We shouldn't prevent tech to be as widespread as possible. And usually even the definition of what is tech is quite blurry. So this is why I started to investigate what could be cases for tech for good. And recently, I think it was 2 months ago, I had the pleasure to have Gauthier Roussil in one of our episodes. And with an ADEME team of several members, he was part of this team, they investigated several use cases in France of company that could have achieved a net positive effect with very comprehensive life cycle assessment and so on. And it was a very well-listened episode. I got a lot of feedback, and a lot of them were about, but what about AI? AI. And I thought about it and I say, but I know someone who has been thoroughly investigating the case of AI for good. And this is you. And this is why I wanted you to help us understand a bit more what you've spotted as use cases and also pitfalls to assess AI for good uses. And without further notice, could you start with sharing one concrete use case where for you it's a no-brainer that using AI is for good?
Absolutely, Gaël. Thank you so much for having me to talk about this evolving topic. And yeah, let's start with an example. Let's start with the dreaded carbon accounting. So the typical sustainability professional globally will report that they spend on average around 50% of their time on compliance. So compliance is a broad term referring to carbon reporting in effect. This is the large amount of labor involved with collecting, synthesizing, cleaning, conforming data from all aspects of the organization, often to different standards that have different reporting structures and different data that they're asking for. And this is a huge amount of time. And when I look at this space of the enterprise, and when I've spoken to so many people around that are tasked with this work, they repeatedly reference examples of AI tools that are emerging, that are helping in this process, that are dramatically decreasing the amount of time that is spent communicating with suppliers, for example, to gather scope 3 data emissions, attributing emission factors to different data points, a very time-consuming task. Going through the process of formulating and synthesizing these data into different reporting structures, a very time-consuming task that AI can help with. And we see quite tangibly and concretely right now, many of the large providers of carbon accounting platforms. So Greenly is a great one based here in France. There's other ones like Persephone, et cetera, that are embedding these AI tools in the actual reporting platform. And in my view, adding significant time savings to the daily work of a sustainability professional. So it's one example where even though there may not be some green outcome that's very clear from the time savings here, it will hopefully give a lot more space and time for these professionals to then focus on more strategic activities, have more time and resources to further sustainability within the organization, et cetera.
Yeah, so that's not directly measurable, I would say. But what I understand is the time-saving aspect will help them to achieve, hopefully, more sustainability achievements or to be more ambitious with their sustainability goals. One of them being, I guess, reducing the carbon footprint, the water footprint, and so on. Do you know if these platforms, they sort of try to assess both the footprint of using these AI tools and the handprint, something like we know that running, and let's talk for simplification purpose, we know that carbon is not everything, far from it, but let's say that we will talk only about carbon footprint just in this example, being able to say, okay, on average, we estimate that using our AI and power tool emit that amount of carbon. And we've noticed and we've conducted studies that if you free 30% of the time of a sustainability team, this is the kind of thing that will happen, including a faster achievement of decarbonization goals, for instance. Do you know any study?
I don't. I think that question is excellent. And I think we're at such an early stage right now of a lot of this integration of what I call applied AI. So these AI tools that are very targeted to specific applied use cases around sustainability. And I think that you'd have to see over time how these efficiency gains within the time on the time side of things translate into other outcomes, hopefully positive ones. I'll add that I don't see a lot of transparency in general around for example, the question you asked about the carbon reporting platforms that have these AI embeds that are increasingly popular with customers. I don't see a lot of discussion there around the environmental footprint of this additional AI piece. Understanding, of course, that the software itself has its own footprint independent of the AI add-on. So I'm not seeing a lot of that on any level. And hopefully that's something that we can start to see the cost-benefit analysis emerging in the future.
If I were a bit hypocritical. You could say, oh, great, they're going to save half of the time so they can fire half of the team, which is also a narrative that we hear a lot in the US at the moment, that there will be a temporary job shift, highly debatable how temporarily it will be. But okay, but I follow your point that we don't see that much transparency. Actually, when I framed the question AI for good, I saw in your eyes that you are not super happy with the way I framed it, because this is a discussion we already had, that in this 3-word sentence, there are 2 issues. The first one is AI, what is it? And the second is the for good. You refer more on the applied AI for sustainability. Could you clarify why you're not comfortable with A, using the word AI that broadly, and B, this for good angle?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for clarifying the nuance here. And we can start actually with the carbon accounting example, because as you brought up, the for good cheerleaders will probably make the point that I initially made, that this is a great development because the extra time savings can be translated into more strategic tasks, etc. But there's just as easily the opposite outcome, which is that this time savings simply leads to slimming down the headcount of sustainability teams in enterprises across the world, which of course could have a negative net impact on the influence and power of the sustainability teams in these enterprises. So I think of this whole discussion as really an exploration. I don't know the answer today in April of 2026 around good or bad or neutral vis-a-vis environmental and social considerations such as labor. What I think about my work as being a partner, both from a research and a consulting perspective, with enterprises and organizations that want to begin this journey of actually thinking about and testing and piloting ways that applied AI can have positive impacts on their sustainability goals. And I can tell you that this is a very nascent, early days activity. I think the big tech sector likes to create this sense of FOMO, as if, we're all missing out by not using AI all the time for everything. But if you actually go and have conversations with people who are working on these tasks within enterprises and organizations, they are by and large at the early stage. They are just learning about what the possibilities are, where some of their inefficiencies and bottlenecks could possibly be helped and serviced by some of these AI tools, and considering subtle things like, do they have the skills in-house currently to deal with the more tech-intensive aspects of this applied AI integration? On the positive side of the ledger, or maybe another viewpoint on the labor question, is that perhaps tasks in the sustainability department that are directly related to compliance may not be as much in demand, but there may be a new type of sustainability professional that has both technical expertise and subject matter expertise in sustainability that becomes very high in demand as some of these tech tools become more integrated into sustainability programs. So all kinds of unanswered questions, but bottom line, in terms of this good or bad, I don't think it's healthy thinking good or bad as much as nuance and actually exploring today the evidence that we have around these positive and negative impacts.
We detailed quite a lot the negative impacts of AI in previous episodes, in forthcoming episodes as well. We will have one, for instance, with Sasha Lucioni and Boris Gamalowski, and they're quite well known for investigating this side of the story. what about the positive angles? What can you share with us as maybe other examples where it's a nuanced world? I really understand what you've said, but the criteria tends to show that it's going in the right direction. So do you have other example than carbon accounting where we believe that, it will benefit mostly if we start using AI?
That's a great...
Go back to the AI point later.
No, it's such an important question. And I really applaud. I mean, it's amazing in a way when you think about the amount of visibility today around the environmental impacts of data centers, be it energy, water, life cycle, et cetera. I mean, 2 years ago, that wasn't even in the news. And now, if you go to Data Center Watch, which is a fantastic NGO, I encourage your listeners to look at. I mean, you have data centers that are blocked and under review, and this whole question of the environmental impacts, at least from the data center point of view, are really much more mainstreamed. Now, and I would argue increasingly having a bit more transparency from the hyperscalers around the actual data, the actual numbers, which of course is another conversation.
And a conversation that many speakers at Green.io New York will have, because the founder of DC Watch will be a speaker. Masheika Allgood will be there. Xiao
Amazing.
Also. So there are real experts about these footprints. But this is also why, because, the theme of Green.io New York this year is AI as a controversial force for sustainability. So in a controversy, there are good and bad. And even if we don't really like this framing, at least pro and con, let's use these words. What are today, the pro usage of AI?
Absolutely. So beyond the very tangible example around carbon reporting, energy efficiency in many, many forms is an aspect of enterprises that I would argue has been connected and aided by machine learning-based AI for a lot longer than we've been having this conversation around data centers. And this is very tangible. It's very specific around, for example, Scope 1 emissions. So using AI, using machine learning-based AI to detect equipment failure, which often can lead to lots of energy inefficiency. Scope 2 emissions, using AI to optimize energy use in buildings. I was shocked to see that around 30% on average of energy, be it heating or cooling in the United States commercially, is spent on empty rooms in buildings.
A quick word about the sponsor of this episode, Resilio. Resilio provides leading data, tools, and professional services to assess and reduce the environmental footprint of tech. As a Green.io listener, Resilio grants you a 1-month free trial access to their Resilio database, a search engine for the footprint of any IT equipment or services. Find the carbon or water footprint for tens of thousands of products in a click, and so much more. The link for this special offer is in the show notes. Full disclosure, I only accept partnership with companies whose services or initiatives I personally support or use myself. As usual, however, I'll let you be your own judge about these products.
This is obviously a huge area where AI can optimize energy efficiency. As I mentioned before, related to Scope 3 emissions, there are all kinds of applications here, I believe, around the gathering and measuring of Scope 3 emissions from the upstream supply chain. A lot of satellite-based data married with AI is having some impact on actually capturing Scope 3 emissions to begin with, which is enormous because when we think about carbon accounting, Scope 3 emissions are the hardest to track, but in most cases, the majority of the footprint of your typical enterprise. So I believe that AI can have enormous impacts around bringing these data from the upstream and downstream aspects of Scope 3 to be more transparent. And I would add to that, Gaël, like nature. I mean, think about how difficult it is to have full visibility on a lot of our ecosystems and natural spaces, be it forests, oceans, biodiversity, land use. The marriage of satellite-based observations with machine learning AI has had enormous impacts, I would argue, on the ability of us to really see and track and even optimize. You know, I was looking at some tools a few weeks ago that are very involved in optimizing the routes of rangers in different protected ecosystems such that they have a higher probability of intersecting illegal poachers in these areas. Again, using satellite-based data and other data historically that AI then marries with to create these really tangible outcomes and insights. So in conclusion, considering a lot of those examples, and particularly on the energy piece, I mean, one of the big challenges around Scope 2 emissions for enterprises that want to optimize their use of renewable energy is matching the most energy-intensive periods of their operations with when the most amount of renewable energy is available on the grid. That's another really tangible example vis-a-vis energy where you can use AI in these positive ways. So some examples, I'll just conclude by saying that what's frustrating to me as a measurement person is that it's so hard to get data. You know, if X enterprise has been using applied AI for energy efficiency for 6 years, it's not something that they're necessarily tracking on its own line item of their reporting. And so that's where, again, this good or bad question becomes quite amorphous because we have more and more a lot of the sort of bad data in terms of impacts, which are significant. By the way, all of your listeners should be very aware of that and reference many of the individuals attending Green I/O in New York who've done tremendous work around transparency and measurement on the sort of bad side of things. But on the good or potentially good side, we don't have these data. We have some case studies, but it's not organized in a comprehensive, transparent way, which again blurs this conversation a lot in terms of having apples to apples comparisons.
And even without talking about comparison, so there are a lot of things that I would love to unpack here. But even without talking about comparisons, just making sure that the maths are done. Like we've used it to improve the road rangers rate. How many poachers did we manage to catch, and what was the cost of using this AI tool? That's a very basic question, and I guess quite a lot of time we don't have the answers.
Yeah,
and that I think that's really an issue today. Yet, going back to what you said about, you mentioned several times satellite images, and especially for Scope 3. How can, I mean, I'm a CFO, I'm a CTO, whoever. How can I use satellite images to get better information about my Scope 3? Could you elaborate a bit on it?
Absolutely. So when you think about computer vision, when you think about the ability of AI to learn from patterns, from visual patterns, one such pattern can be a smokestack to use the most simple example. And so what some of the tools are starting to do is to learn from different smokestacks, from different emissions patterns coming from different sites, and starting to attach numbers related to energy use, GHG emissions, even water, associating based on similar sites what the footprint portfolio would be with a given visual pattern. And so the idea is that if you have these multiple sites that are upstream, for example, on your supply chain, you may not have the ability to go on the ground to each one or to get documentation from the actual supplier, which, by the way, could be anywhere in the world at this point, and also parts of the world that maybe have different standards or different requirements around pollution, etc. But by having the satellite view, and satellites have really proliferated in the past 5 to 10 years with a lot more open source information than there was even 5 years ago, you can start to use AI to develop estimates of some of these scope 3 footprints, which then again starts to fill in a lot of these blanks that otherwise are just being shown as blanks or estimates that are maybe not even less reliable than some of the admittedly estimates that are coming through the AI satellite integration.
But that's quite fascinating because that's basically a shortcut through the entire supply chain to trying to assess at some point the most critical suppliers you might have and not relying on supplier A, which embedded the declarations, the estimates most of the time of supplier B, which also embedded the estimate of supplier C. And if you believe supplier C is your main perpetrator for one of your products, you can directly jump on it. My question now is how acceptable or permitted these techniques are regarding the GHG protocol. I mean, can you, when you're auditing, when you're in front of the auditors, you say, okay, I've assessed directly. It's not the data provided by my supplier, but it's the way I calculate it. How people are, how auditors are comfortable with it.
No, it's an excellent question. And again, it falls into the category of stay tuned. I think anyone getting into the compliance space today, starting a career, I think working at this intersection of compliance and AI, specifically around something like this, is a fascinating area because the GHG protocol is in the process of updating a lot of these guidelines that you mentioned, which of course is incredibly important because even if the technology exists, what's to say that it's accepted?
We mentioned it several times in this discussion. Green.io New York is next week with the most direct lineup we've ever programmed on AI's environmental contradictions. No corporate PR, no techno-solutionism, just practitioners, researchers, and community advocates putting hard numbers on hard questions. Green.io listeners can redeem free tickets using the voucher Green.io VIP. The link is in the show notes. And now, back to our episode.
So stay tuned. And obviously, it's not to say that the AI satellite view is perfect. It's certainly imperfect. But one thing that it is allowing, whether it's through supply chain visibility, whether it's monitoring forests, this is another area around carbon credits. There's been so much scrutiny, rightly so, around the quality of carbon credits. And a lot of those providers have really been in trouble around some of the claims that they've been making to the market. Well, this is another area where satellite-based views of land areas, forests, etc., give a lot more granularity to the credits being offered to the marketplace. So it's additive. It's a new tool. It's, I believe, a tool with a lot of potential to broaden our aperture, our lens on these different aspects of production or land use in the case of the carbon credits. But it's far from imperfect. And unfortunately, none of these tools come out of the box working perfectly. The piece that, and I hope we can talk about this, because the piece that really matters is having teams, individuals, companies, organizations that become champions for testing and optimizing a lot of these tools. Because this is another thing that I see a lot right now, is that it always is a risk when you work in a company to champion a new approach, because in doing that, you are risking failure. And one thing that really frustrated me as an entrepreneur and as someone working in applied AI for sustainability was last year there was this MIT study that came out, I think it was in the fall, that very broadly said that their survey had shown that up to 95% of AI pilots fail. And it was very much spun by the media, at least in America, as, oh, well, applied AI has no promise. It has no hope. MIT says it's hopeless. Let's move on. Well, it's important to remember pilots fail mostly. Most products, most processes, most new things fail. And that is the nature of innovation and entrepreneurship. But it's important when you're in an organization or an enterprise to be allowed to fail, because if you don't have senior management giving you resources and sort of room to try, experiment, and maybe fail, none of these tools that we're talking about today are really going to scale and make an impact, because you have to be able to do that testing and optimization.
That makes a lot of sense. And hence my question related to the GHG protocol, that how mature these tools are and how accepted are they, because we tend to know that auditors want to base their judgment on proven concept rather than concepts being tested. And that says something about the difficulty to push for a sustainable use of AI when everyone jumps on, proof of concept fails. Yeah, that's the entire purpose of proof of concept. That's really something that when you manage teams and product teams, like creating this safe radius blast that you are allowed to fail, you are allowed to experience, and that will have no repercussion on your career, your job, whatever. Is really important. And I guess at the moment, sustainability, especially in the US, being under a lot of pressure, people will be very cautious using this. So thanks for mentioning this point that, we are in the early phase, and yes, we are testing. And unfortunately, it means that many of these experiments and these applied AI for sustainability projects will fail. There is another topic that really popped up in my mind when you were listing all those potentially net positive use cases. And it started with the 30% of commercial buildings in the US wasting energy, or being empty when they use energy.
Right.
And it connects also with this use of satellite images, because you mentioned machine learning AI, and I will come back to this point. Do we need AI for this? My point is, could we rather have also people just switching off the lights and turning off the heaters, rather than the need to deploy a complex AI system to monitor an entire building and making sure that basically we don't waste energy? So what are the alternatives? And then we will come back to the second point, which is which AI are we talking about? But is it a too easy solution to say, oh, okay, people are wasteful. Let's use AI to avoid this waste. Hence creating partially, maybe, if the net positive is here, but still creating some waste that could be avoided if we had other solutions. It might be a very simplistic question. Sorry about this.
No, it's not simplistic. It's very important. And it goes back to the central question that any product manager or sustainability manager actually dealing with this in practice has to answer, which is, where are the areas of our enterprise that are currently exhibiting inefficiencies or have the need perhaps for improvement? Where's the low-hanging fruit, if you will, around some of these issues using energy efficiency in this particular case? And then is AI the right solution? And again, this goes back to the nuance in our conversation today. I'm not saying that AI should necessarily be the solution in all cases, but we are seeing that it is a new tool that is offering potential in a lot of these areas. So, for example, you might be a property manager who's tasked with some sort of sustainability goal around reducing energy use, and you may have a pretty good data set. You might have pretty good tech embedded in, say, the 10 buildings in your portfolio that are reporting back real-time data around energy use using different sensors and systems that are fairly up to date. That might be a use case where it's a no-brainer to embed AI on top of the existing system to realize some of these efficiencies, even though, of course, there is some environmental impact of adding it on. The positive results would arguably be a lot larger. On the other hand, that same use case, that same example could be someone who has 10 buildings and they're all in a different country and they're not very modern in terms of data collection and monitoring. It would be a whole lot of work to even get the data ready in the first place for any type of AI integration. So the individual in that case might make a different judgment. They might decide, there are other ways. There are ways around behavioral changes. There may be some other technology embeds that we can look at that aren't as sophisticated as AI, but given our reality, in this case from the perspective of data readiness, it's probably makes more sense. So nuanced question for sure.
And do you know any frameworks that are currently being used by product managers to sort of solve this tension? Shall I go or shall I stay? Huh?
It's funny you asked that, Gaël. This is something I've thought about because I've created some frameworks and tools in the past around sustainability measurement, and I've thought a lot about this. It seems like there might be a space in the market around certain topics for just that kind of tool where there's a sort of a, I don't know if it would be hard for it maybe to be as granular as like really calculating costs and benefits in the way that we kind of wish for, but a checklist, a list of questions to ask, sort of a manual.
Weighting the benefits.
Yeah. I think that's a really great idea, and I do think it's probably something that consultants will develop. I'm sure that many consultants that work with some of these enterprises on this topic have thought through some of the questionnaires and issues to consider for sure.
Well, if some people in the audience they know about these tools, please do comment because I'm pretty sure it will interest a lot of people. And maybe my last question, because we posed it and we circled around it, but without really tackling the elephant in the room, is what is AI? And by that, I mean you very carefully chosen your word when you were mentioning the use case with satellite images, saying machine learning AI.
Yeah.
I guess choosing the right tool within the massive world of AI matters. Once again, same question. Is it really a world of LLM AI for good, or actually most of the projects are still relying on other form of AI, which are maybe less energy intensive, that we're here since a longer time?
Yeah. No, again, that's really important nuance. And, it's pretty stark. In my view, I look at large language models and I see huge associated environmental impacts, limited case studies in terms of good outcomes from an environmental perspective. And then I look at these much smaller, much more targeted machine learning applications that have much smaller environmental impacts in terms of their resource requirements, but potentially much larger positive impacts in terms of energy efficiency, nature monitoring, time savings around compliance, some of the examples that we've been given. There's also the question of agentic AI, which we haven't really talked about. And this is a really interesting rub to the conversation because, many people that I know that work in enterprises, just in any department, not just sustainability, are being encouraged to develop agents. And it's like, make an agent, make an agent. Well, what is that agent doing vis-a-vis a lot of the trade-offs here from a labor perspective, from the accuracy of information? What's the skill set required of the future to manage agents instead of managing people? And then, of course, what are the environmental impacts of a lot of these agents that may or may not be deployed longer term? But I think to your question, the gap that really is problematic right now in the discourse is everyone just thinks of large language models when they hear the word AI. And so one challenge that I always have in this conversation is explaining that there are different types of AI, and as a result, there are different associated environmental impacts. And it's key to understanding this nuance to be able to fully assess the pros and cons. And again, I don't want to say that, I hope that large language models become dramatically more efficient from an environmental perspective. But I also hope that, to your point around behavior, we start to evolve into having discernment around when we do and don't use a large language model. Because unfortunately, what I see now is a lot of people just go to their LLM to get information the way they maybe would go to a browser and search Google a few years ago. And obviously, that's not a good thing from an environmental perspective. So we really have to keep pushing this conversation and the awareness and the urgency around the bad stuff, because even though hyperscalers and some of the cloud providers are starting to be more transparent, I don't think that it's seeped down into everyday users to the extent that it needs to.
I will challenge, try to be more transparent. We very recently, just a few days ago, learned that all the main hyperscalers plus Netflix plus several other big tech players successfully lobbied the EED, the Energy Efficiency Directive from the European Union, to make the disclosure of information at data center level a commercial secret, making the law way less efficient than it was supposed to be at the beginning, because then people will work only on aggregated data and so on, and individual responsibility will be watered down, I would say. But that being said, maybe the question I would love to ask you is regarding all the different use cases you mentioned, Scope 3, direct tracking of emissions, the ranger protecting wildlife, You mentioned also the energy efficiency of building, directly monitoring emissions from a factory, from a Scope 1 approach, all the things related to biodiversity and the way we can better know the land usage and tracking. You mentioned carbon credits via forestry project and so on. In all these cases, can you spot at least one with a very strong tendency to use LLM and not the other?
That's a really good question. Actually, back to the beginning of our conversation, so there are some interesting startups. So LLMs are Gemini, Claude, etc. But also there are some startups now that are building much smaller LLMs trained on really specific data sets. And one such data set is regulations. So an interesting startup, I'm forgetting now the name of it, but they built this custom LLM that was trained on EU directives around sustainability reporting. Now that's an interesting use case, right? Because you're not using the large LLM for a small question. You're adapting the architecture of a larger LLM to be trained on a very small amount of information that then could add, I would think, real value if your task is to monitor the most up-to-date EU regulations and directives. So I think some of that customization around LLMs is interesting for sure to look at. I don't think, though, I don't have good examples from the other realms where LLMs are the primary use case, but I will say that around the topic of piloting, one thing that's unfortunate now in many enterprises is that this distinction around different types of AI is not well understood among senior management. So senior management might say, okay, everyone has a KPI to use AI, use it more. And so what do people do? Well, they create emails and use LLMs to generate content and visuals and graphics. And they don't think about this universe of applied AI where potentially there could be really interesting applications, as we've talked about. And part of the reason that that's happening is that the incentive structure and the direction from above is not aligning with this exploration that I think is important around areas applied AI can impact sustainability, efficiency, etc. So, again, more nuance.
It really says, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
that's all.
It says something about the lack of compass in many companies. I don't know if you hear recently NVIDIA's CEO explaining that he would fire any engineers consuming only $15 to $20K of token because he would believe that this engineer is sub-efficient and he would not consider seriously an engineer not using for $250,000 of tokens. I think the numbers were really, really impressive. And what sort of metrics is it? Like just consume for the sake of consuming, because we believe that within this big consumption of tokens, some positive things might happen. It says really something about the hype curve at the moment. Because
Absolutely.
Why using AI for AI? I mean, and you're perfectly right. Let's use AI, but wisely for applied things, whether it's the regular business model or in our case, we're pushing for sustainability use cases. But in any case, let's apply it for something tangible.
Absolutely. No, obviously the CEO of NVIDIA understands the technical side, I would think. But it's a new technology. So a lot of CEOs don't have deep technology AI expertise. So it's another reason why this nuance. And look, like again, we just don't know. We're certainly in an era of really crazy extravagance around token consumption, etc. It's gotten excessive, but things change, technologies change. Like a lot of times, these initial periods, if you look back to the internet .com boom 25 years ago, broadband, tons and tons of broadband was built. It was really about infrastructure at the beginning. And it was only after the infrastructure was built too much, arguably, and there was a big correction. And then you started seeing the application piece. Then you started to see the applied internet happening, e-commerce, all these different B2B tools that emerged through the internet and obviously using the broadband that had been laid earlier. So we don't know like how these usage patterns will play out over time. And it'll be fascinating to watch for sure.
Can imagine, and I love your analogy because the .com boom was actually naming the wrong culprit. It was more an ISP boom, internet service provider boom, as
exactly
you mentioned. They collapsed, but they left behind a pretty solid infrastructure that then the digital revolution built upon. I could really straightforwardly see the analogy with what is happening at the moment with this data center boom, is all this massive over-provisioning of computing capacities and even hitting boundaries and limits everywhere because they're just simply too big to... all of them, there is no chance. This is a discussion I had with Sasha and Boris, and they will, I think in 2 weeks now, they will be on the show and they will explain about it. But there is no way that all the planned projects will go live.
No.
But yet, even if we've got this AI crash that some people are expecting, we might see that a remaining infrastructure, based on the remaining infrastructure, we will have alternative use cases, maybe way more frugal, way wise, simply more wise, to look for a sustainability angles and even business angle, but without just throwing tokens out of the window. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. And well, Jeremy, that was a really insightful conversation. I expected so. Maybe other people might like to get these insights directly from you. How can they connect with you?
Absolutely. Please connect on LinkedIn. I believe LinkedIn, as another factoid to LLMs, is the second most referenced source for content production outputs through at least OpenAI after Reddit. I think I'm correct about that. And I bring that up just because connect with me on LinkedIn, but also for your listeners that want to learn more about this, follow Green.io, follow individuals associated with Green.io, speakers at your conferences, because you can learn so much through the posts of these people. In fact, it really, LinkedIn, as much as social media is criticized, for me, the algorithm of LinkedIn really works well because it does create such a narrow, curated viewpoint on topics, and also people share. They share learnings, they share new studies, they share experiences from the perspective of working with this stuff. So please connect there. And obviously, I look forward to being in touch with anyone who wants to talk further about this topic.
With nuance and remembering that it's a developing topic.
Yes. If we have this conversation in a year, it would probably be entirely different.
We might have this conversation in a year because as crazy as it seems, you will not be at Green.io New York because currently you're traveling in Europe.
Yes.
So we might see each other at another Green.io conference, but at least for the 2027 edition, I know the 26 is not even launched, but we're already planning the next one. I'm pretty sure we will do some things together.
Absolutely.
So thanks a lot for joining, Jeremy.
Thank you, Gaël. This was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this Green.io episode. Jeremy brought a lot of nuances in this AI for good debate, which we should indeed reframe as applied AI for sustainability. Use cases are there, saving data gathering time for sustainability teams, tracking emissions from Scope 3 suppliers, protecting wildlife or reducing energy consumption in commercial buildings. But we often lack consistent and harmonized data to assess both the footprint and the positive impact of these projects. And many of these projects fail because we are still in a discovery phase of AI. As usual, all the references mentioned in this episode are in the show notes. More information and the full transcript can also be found on our website, greenio.tech. A huge thank you to everyone who made this episode possible, starting with you, my dear fellow responsible technologists. Let's keep on building a greener digital world together.
One bite at a time.